The Geneva Motor Show might have been cancelled, but the show must go on. So, the big news out of Crewe is this.
The Bentley Bacalar. Now we'll get to, well, that name for a start, we'll come back to that in a minute, and we'll come back to the specifics of this car as well, but I want to talk about what this really represents for Bentley, because this has been done as a conjunction between the design department of Bentley and Mulliner. Now Mulliner is a name that you may be aware of, you may not be aware of. They've done sort of bespoke things for cars in the past for Bentley, and it goes back to the very origins of Bentley, in fact, and coach building. And this is what this represents. It represents a return to coach building for Bentley. Now, coach building, in case you're not aware, is something that harks back to the very start of the motor car, really, whereby you would buy a chassis and an engine and then really clothe the car yourself, go to somebody else, and they would put a body on it, and you choose your own thing. The specifics of this car, then, on that theme, the mechanics underneath are not vastly different. We've got a W12 engine. It's essentially a Continental GT underneath. So W12, 6 litres, powers up very slightly to 650 brake horsepower, 0 to 60 down very, very slightly to 3.6 seconds. And there's a predicted top speed of over 200 miles an hour. Wider tracks, so 10 millimetres wider at front, 20 millimetres wider at the rear. But apart from that, underneath, pretty much the same. It is all about this carbon fibre body. So let's talk a little bit about the design of it. Round to the front here. Now, if you saw the concept last year, the EXP100, you'll recognise this face. That was a concept. This is going into production. So we have these single headlights here as opposed to the two that we've become used to. This huge grille at the end of this nose that sweeps down here. It's actually a very aggressive grille. It's very upright here, but then with this amazing mesh that sort of sits proud like that. It's a very striking car. And the whole thing, you'll see, sort of really tapers back from this very sort of bluff front end. One of the designers described it to me as they think a Bentley should really be a car that looks as though it could have an argument with the wall and the wall would always lose. I rather like that. Paint. Whilst we're around here, let's talk about the paint because it is very yellow. It is called flame yellow, in fact. Now, it's made with quite an unusual component. So rice husk ash is a sort of a byproduct of, surprise, surprise, the rice industry. And normally it would just be discarded. It's not any use to anyone. But you can turn this ash into a silica, which then goes into this paint and helps give some of the lovely sort of flip nature to this. So actually the yellow, it's quite a bit of green in it when you look at it at certain points and really helps to build out the curves and lines on this car. Very interesting, very sustainable as well. Now, they wanted on this car lots of bits that, well, I suppose stuff that couldn't be done on a production line. And this whole car is bespoke. The only bits in the body that are carried over from a standard Continental GT are the door handles there because you need them for the keyless entry, I suppose. Things like these wheels, 22-inch wheels, front and rear. There are 3 colours going on in here, and you can choose as a customer to spec, well, whatever you want in terms of them. But to get 3 colours in is apparently a real pain. I also love the little detail down here, which is a sort of a modern take on the spinner. Obviously, it's not functional because you've got the wheel nuts there, but it's a really nice detail, the sort of thing you want on a coach-built car like this. Now, as we move further down here, the designer is very proud of these rear haunches, which are very, very impressive. This line here is wonderful, the way it's incredibly muscular at the rear, and then the rear deck. Now, let's talk a little bit more about coach building and the fact that this has no roof whatsoever. How impractical, you might say. Why would customers want that? Well, part of this is that the 12 cars that they're going to make, they talked to customers at a very early point. They obviously knew the sort of people that were going to be able to buy this. We'll come to the price in a minute. And therefore they involved them from an early point. This started production, I suppose the process started about a year ago. First cars will be delivered sometime in 2021. Each one will be very, very different, but they talked to the customers and said, are you up for having a car with no roof? Because it gives us an awful lot of freedom. It's a massive expense and massively difficult really to engineer a roof for a new bodied car. So get rid of it entirely. Designers are very happy people, and you've got these wonderful 2 cowlings on the back. Again, they wanted to go for some of the original monoposto Bentleys, racing Bentleys, and I know this is a 2-seater, but the 2 seats are very individual. You've got that sort of cockpit feel inside. We'll come back to the interior in a minute. Around the back here, then incredible back with these volumes that go inside there, and then the Bentley badge that stands proud. I love the detail on these lights as well. That sort of looks to me a bit like a circuit board, I suppose. So overall, carbon fibre body is a pretty impressive thing. Let's have a look inside, because that is just as special. Now, there's an awful lot to talk about in here. Obviously, everything really is bespoke in here, so everything is different. The only thing that's the same is the centre to the steering wheel, which is, by the way, the first flat-bottomed steering wheel in a Bentley, and the only thing that's the same, as I say, is the centre bit, just there, because otherwise they'd have had to do all sorts of crash tests again for the airbag. Everything else is different. Now, where to start with the materials in this? Let's start with, I think, the coolest bit, which is the wood in here. So we have the open pore wood up here, and then, in fact, it's sort of, there's the veneer is polished down here. The wood itself is riverwood. It is 63 times more expensive than the next most expensive veneer used in a Bentley. And this is 5,500 years old, this oak. 5,500 years old. They've had it carbon dated. And this is wood that would be dragged out of the peat bogs, and it used to be burnt by the farmers because they needed to get rid of it. And then now you discover they can make this from it and make quite a lot of money as well. Anyway, the materials on here, well, we've also got leather, we've got tweed up here as well, comes from Scotland, from the mill up there, and in fact it's taken from the very centre of the Huntsman check. Now Huntsman, there was a collaboration with Huntsman before with Bentley, and they loved really right in the centre that check, so they've taken that and put it on there. And I like the fact they haven't used it everywhere. It's on the back of these seats, and just, I mean, that's not a part you'd usually expect to be highlighted, but it just looks really cool, particularly when you're getting into the car. The seats themselves, well, you've got some antique leather in here. The stitching on here, yes, 148,199 stitches in each of these seats, and each of the 12 cars that are going to be produced will have a different pattern on them, each with similar numbers. That is mind-boggling levels of detail, and just the sort of thing that you couldn't do on a normal production Bentley. So there we are. We've obviously also got this sort of bronze colour in here. All the bright work, as you might have noticed on the outside, is in this sort of bronze colour, which is rather nice. In terms of the actual structure of the cabin, obviously we've got no rear seats, but you have got these amazing sort of vaulted sections behind me with bespoke leather in the back. It's quite a practical car to that extent. It's still got the boot as well, so you really could do a grand tour as long as it wasn't going to rain, obviously. The final thing I want to talk about in here is, well, this blue colour, which is picked out on these switches here and on the clock there, and that links back to the name Bacalar. Because why Bacalar? Well, that's because it is a lake in southern Mexico. It sort of follows on from Bentley's idea of naming things after things in nature that begin with B. So Bentayga was a rock, and this is, well, it's a lake, and it's known as the Lake of Seven Colours because it has a particularly vibrant turquoise colour. The price for this car? £1.5 million plus taxes, and that's a starting price, because obviously this being a coach-built car, each one is going to be very different. This is just an idea. Black, grey, green, whatever you want, different woods, you can have different colour wheels. The world, as they say, is your oyster. So there we are, a return to coach building for Bentley and Mulliner. Hopefully it's just the start. I'm intrigued to see what they do next. Let us know your thoughts and comments in the boxes just down below.